Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome back to the DMZ, everybody. Tanned and rusted we are after a week off from the DMZ. And good to be back and good to talk to you, Bill Scher.
I think we had ideologically appropriate vacations.
Yes, I only go to the blue parts of red states. That's how I like to roll when
I thought you were pure red. I thought being in Scottsdale was like this. How red for a summer vacation could you be?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Scottsdale is I'm sure it's pretty conservative. I feel more mellow than usual. Like I feel like I'm in my Ben Carson. But I need to drink more coffee. Where did you? Where did you guys go?
I went deep blue, Lake Champlain in Charlotte, Vermont.
Wow, they speak French up
Johnson to Burlington and Middlebury. But Lake Champlain, an underrated lake. It doesn't get Great Lake status, but quite gorgeous. We had a lake house right on the water and looking right at the western sky, seeing the sun come down behind the mountains every night. Good stuff.
Beautiful. Sounds like at least near great status as far as I'm concerned. And then how was it with the kids?
We had a couple other families with us who also had kids, so they got to run around. And my oldest one has really taken to the water this year. The problem with Lake Champlain is that it's super rocky. It's not sandy beach, just like giant shards of rock. So you got to kind of get over this band of rock to be able to swim, and that was a little trying. But once they got in, and their life jackets, we had a couple of inflatable boats we could tool around a little bit.
That's
and
cool.
They enjoyed that, and so they also got to watch copious amounts of wild kratts. That's the show of the season. I can tell myself that they're learning about nature while they rot their brains.
Well, no, I think that show's fairly educational. You're lucky, man. My kids are now getting into all they want to watch, and I try to gear them toward the Veggie Tales and the Handy Mannies, but all they want is like incredibly violent superhero cartoons. So
they're learning how might makes right. You're teaching them valuable lessons for how they will survive the world of evil that they're being entered into.
Well, look, I'm all for superheroes, and if it's clear, like good versus evil, I'm all for that. But some of these shows, it's a little ambiguous as to who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. And
there's certain shows that my kids watch. They don't watch stuff that's as violent, but so many people acting mean is a staple of a lot of cartoons.
Yeah,
and some of the older cartoons were there'll be like a bullying episode, and the way the bullies get stopped is by extra bullying. And I'm having hard to explain. That wasn't maybe the best tactic for dealing with that bully. That kid was being kind of a jerk too, and maybe you shouldn't do that when you're in school. That's the thing I'm always on the lookout for. Is how I'm teaching proper behavior, and sometimes these shows don't help me.
Yeah, but it's tough, man, trying to raise them right in the face of this culture, whether it's consumerism or violence or whatever in the media. And I don't really, I try to keep close tabs on what they're watching and limit their exposure to that stuff. But it turns out the mother-in-law would just kind of give them the iPad, and my oldest boy knows how to go to. She'll put a show on Netflix, and he'll just change the show, and she let him do that. So he was watching, it's not horrible stuff, but it's like these superhero squad, which is more violent than it might sound. So, I try to.
My other big problem is even if they're watching the nicest show on the planet, it just does something to their brain. Where after the show is over, and I got to come off at some point. Then they just act like complete jerks for the next hour.
Yeah,
they just lose their sense of social skills after sitting in front of the TV and now we said back to school day yesterday, so now the amount of TV they watch will be greatly diminished. Summer is terrible for TV watching. But now they have to get out of the house. They have to go to school. They have stuff after school. There's only so much time of the day they can watch. That to me is a preferable situation.
Well, I can just say we had a great time, and I wrote about this on Facebook. But I had this epiphany of I was struggling with I needed to put in the second draft of my manuscript to my editor for my forthcoming book.
And what manuscript are you talking about, sir, for folks who do not know?
Well, I don't like to promote myself, Bill, and I don't like to talk about myself. But since you brought it up, there's a book called Too Dumb to Fail, and I believe if you go to Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com, you could pre-order that book, which will drop right before the Iowa caucuses officially. But get it now. And so I had to turn in the second draft of the manuscript, and a couple things were plaguing me. And I kept thinking, it'll come to me during my sleep. I'll dream the answer to these problems with the book that I'm having, or during the shower, or when I'm out on a run or something. And it just never happened. And it certainly wasn't going to happen sitting in front of a laptop. And the first full day we're in Arizona, we hike Pinnacle Peak. I talked to my wife for an hour and a half going up and down the mountain about the book. And I don't know whether it was talking it out or the change of scenery. I mean, just seeing mountains, it's so different than what I see every day in D.C. Or the sun or the exercise or just a combination of. But I actually had not one but two epiphanies where I solved my problems with the book and all was right with the world. And I think that may have made, that alone may have paid for the whole trip. That aha moment, two aha moments that I had.
Excellent.
So get away. The lesson there is, get out of town and take, get some exercise. Good values.
And you're able to clear your head despite having children, which is an enormous accomplishment. I'm not sure I got that when I was on my vacation.
Well, we had grandma and grandpa on the trip as well. So there were, when we were hiking this mountain, they were watching the kids. So that helps. It takes a village.
Excellent.
It takes a village, Bill. I don't have to tell you that.
So we're 5 months away for your book's release, but if I may be so unkind, there's a lot of dumbness going on right now in the Republican Party primary process. I worry your book might be too late to solve the current IQ crisis.
Well, I don't know, man. It's coming out right before Iowa and New Hampshire, so potentially it could. And then obviously March is going to be a big month. So there'll be a month or two where I think the book could help drive the debate, the discussion, and the decision. But yeah, man, it's so interesting. Bill, when I started thinking about and writing this book, I mean, these problems are lingering problems about the sort of dumbing down of conservatism and this populist vibe out there that bugs me. But Donald Trump, I didn't even think he was going to run. You know what I mean? When we first started doing this, and honestly, like everything this has done nothing but sort of reinforce my premises and make the book more relevant. I guess at this point I have to ironically hope that Trump stays in and that things stay the same until the book comes out so that I can then be the guy who has the answers to it.
But now you had a piece on your Daily Caller blog this week where you suggest that it's not Trump that's continuing to rise, it's Ben Carson that's on the upswing, and there have been some other pieces out there that say he's sort of the anti-Trump. He's Mr. Nice. He's running a very quiet, low key campaign and building up support. Precinct by precinct. Is the summer of Trump over and the fall of Carson upon us?
Well, I like to say the autumn of Carson because the fall of Carson is sort of a double,
the autumn of Carson.
Misleading. Look, here's the deal, Bill. I think something like 7 or 8 of my last 10 posts had been about Donald Trump. So I'm clearly looking for other things to write about. I do think Carson's interesting though, because I don't think he had it's so weird how I feel like my instincts have been shot. I mean, I used to be able to watch a debate and sort of know what the polling the next day or the next week would show based on who won and who lost. Like I didn't feel like Ben Carson had a very good debate at all, and yet, despite having a pretty low profile and being really overshadowed by Donald Trump, not just in the debate but in general, Ben Carson has continued to surge in second place and doing really well polling. And you start to think, that whole, like the sign at a construction site, how many days since the last accident, it's been a long time since Ben Carson said something stupid. He's really sort of mad,
Has it been that long? Are you sure about that?
Seems like it. And I feel like, Trump has expanded the Overton window. And I think, in comparison, if it wasn't for Trump, you would be like, Carson's, this crazy winger, and he's never been elected. But I feel like because of Trump, Carson now becomes this moderate serious compromise candidate. Anyway, that's what my piece is sort of about. And the other thing I'll say about Carson is he says that he's learned his lessons. He actually says that he's learned, and it seems like he has actually become a better candidate. And I think that's a credit to him if in fact he has actually kind of figured this thing out within the last year. That's pretty cool if he has in fact done it. We'll see if it sticks, but it does seem like he's become a better candidate along the way, and a more serious one at that. And obviously,
I don't think.
I would just say quickly. Obviously, he has a lot of things going for him. He's African American from the mean streets of Detroit, kid who makes good, becomes a world famous neurosurgeon. There's a TV movie about him. He's got a lot of cool things going for him, but then he would always do or say things that I thought undercut and undermined his advantages. But if he is able to tweak that and just keep the good stuff and cut out the bad stuff, now you're left with a pretty impressive guy running for president.
But I still think he's yet to really be in the crucible. You might argue that he is committing fewer gaffes now, and he's obviously doing something right. As people may not realize, he actually has the heaviest TV ad presence in Iowa, which is fueling, and that's where his strongest poll numbers are in Iowa, and he's tied it with Trump in one poll in Iowa, and he has more evangelical support in Iowa, and the evangelicals have been quite dominant in Republican primaries in Iowa. Huckabee and Santorum winning the last two. Trump's support has been more all the other factions of the Republican Party, and less so much the social conservative. So I agree. He's improved in those respects and doing certain things correct, but he hasn't had to weather the kind of grilling that you get once you are really treated like a front runner. Trump's handled that by just sort of with a sheer force of personality, right. Turning into every skid and refusing to apologize for anything, and has held on to 20-25% in doing that, which is not nothing, but it's certainly not enough to actually win the whole nomination outright. And now if Trump's shtick starts to get dull and Carson has his moment, he's going to have to deal with a whole different set of pressures that he has never had to deal with his entire life. And then you'll know if he's really an improved candidate or not.
That's true, but I would say that you've got people like Barack Obama, who in 2008 learned on the campaign trail and became better through the process of debates. And he sort of had some stumbles and made some mistakes early on before the microscope was really on him. And so he benefited from that. And then you compare it to people like Sarah Palin, who was airdropped in the middle of the 2008 campaign, selected, not elected, and had to get up to speed very quickly. And we all know where that went. And then she had the option of sort of learning from her mistakes or doubling down on them. We know where that went. And it seems like Carson is taking a different tack, that he's, by virtue of the fact that he got in early, I think he might have been the first actually to declare, I don't remember, but he's sort of learning, yeah, it's good that that the spotlight's not on him right now. I mean, here I'll go with a football analogy, right? But Washington Redskins are just falling apart right now, and it's a complete mess. And one wonders, in the old days, when I say the old days, I'm just 15, 20 years ago, if you were a great quarterback, like a first-round draft pick or something, you would still go and hold Joe Montana's clipboard for 3 years, watching him start, being an apprentice, paying your dues, getting hazed, practicing, learning, and then someday you would get to start in the NFL, and you would either make it or you wouldn't, but you would have had 2 or 3 years of sort of ramping up. And now the trend is someone like RG3, you sign him out of college and you think he's this great player, and then he's your starting quarterback like the first year. And I think there's sort of a similar thing happening. I mean, it takes a while, even if you're a successful, I think Trump's the exception because he wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a successful businessman who was like on TV and had been, spent decades actually in the public eye on TV. But most of these folks, if you're a successful military officer, high-ranking military officer or surgeon, you haven't had that kind of experience, even though you're obviously very smart and experienced. You're not experienced in dealing with the media. So I think it takes time. And I think Carson is, I think he might be learning on the job and actually learning on the job.
Well, I am far less optimistic than you are on his long-term prospects. I think he's just way too shallow policy-wise. Anytime an outsider candidate gets into that front-runner's perch, that you get really grilled on the details. And if you can't show basic competence, then you tend to be treated like, okay, I thought maybe you'd be a serious candidate, but now you're not. Ross Perot kind of sustained something because he did these 30-minute presentations where he showed his grasp of the federal budget. And so people could say, okay, this guy's not coming in, out of nowhere. This guy actually has some understanding of the problems he's about to face. Now, he had other elements of craziness which held him back, but that's why I think he managed to do better than other third-party candidates than is typical. So I don't think Carson's going to go beyond the 15 minutes. But let me ask you, from a liberal perspective, it's sort of hazy why he'd be doing well at all. Trump, we can kind of explain. You can say, well, if you hate immigrants, you love Trump, or you like brash, authoritarian personalities, you like Trump. You like Carly Fiorina because you fear we can't go up against a woman candidate unless we have our own woman. Maybe in 2012, Republicans like Herman Cain because they thought they needed to have an African American to go up against an African American. But for 2016, you don't need a Ben Carson to do that. Obama's not on the ballot. So he doesn't have the normal qualifications. He's not the right demographic profile you really want for 2016. Not that having an African American is bad, of course, but just he's not going up against a woman, not going against a black candidate. So what do you talk to Carson supporters? Do you have a direct firsthand knowledge? Like, what is it about him that strikes a chord with people? Because under normal circumstances, this guy wouldn't get out of the box.
Well, look, I think, clearly there's an anti-experience, anti-establishment thing happening. If you add up, you mentioned Carly Fiorina, who's doing great right now, and will be in that CNN debate, it looks like, coming up in September. If you add up Trump plus Ben Carson plus Carly Fiorina plus Ted Cruz, who's only been in office like 3 years. Basically, you've got 4 candidates probably polling combined at about 60% who have a combined experience of 3 years of elected experience. Remember, Cruz had never been elected to anything before. He was Solicitor General or something in Texas. I forget. It was an appointed position. Cruz never elected to anything before, and he's only been in since, 2012, I think, right? So sworn in January of 2013. So you've got the top four candidates representing about 60% of the vote with 2.5, 3 years combined elected experience. So I think that is certainly part of what explains Carson's appeal, is he's an outsider, and it's ironically a benefit that he's never been elected to anything. I think the African-American thing still really matters, Bill. The fact that Obama's not the opponent isn't that important. I mean, I think, conservatives and Republicans just have spent years being casually accused of being racist, and nominating an African-American Republican to be, to run for, to be your nominee for president would seem to undermine that notion.
But then why not Cruz? Why not Jindal? Why not Rubio? I mean, you have plenty of other choices that, I mean, even if you want the outsider, Cruz still has that outsider sheen. I mean, to be a neurosurgeon is probably like the least relevant qualification for probably at least a business person said that I've run something. I mean, I think that's thin to be president, but like I get the parallel. They're both executive positions.
Well, the other thing is, I think Carson, even though Carson is much more mild-tempered compared to Trump, the one thing they also both have in common is this hatred for political correctness and this sense that, that's sort of their message, that I'm not going to be politically correct. So, I think like if you combine the fact that like Carson is, sort of is politically incorrect, that Carson is an outsider who's never been elected, that Carson did stand up to Obama in that prayer breakfast speech with Obama sort of sitting captive behind him. That's when he made the big splash, obviously. And then, maybe you and I know that being a neurosurgeon isn't the best preparation training ground for being president, but it's still it's highly respected, and he was, at the top of his field. I just think you cobble it all together, and I would say, I guess ultimately, I'm beginning to second guess everything that I know about politics, that the rules are have essentially changed. And I think it's possible. I'm not predicting it, not saying it's likely, but I think it's possible. Like, I'm now at the point where, like, I think anything could happen. I think that
I was watching a little bit of a C-SPAN thing. Chuck Todd was moderating a panel of pollsters and other political muckety-mucks about the 2016 race, and there's a lot of that. Donald Trump's proving all the old rules don't apply anymore. Blah blah blah, and I don't see the basis for that at all. But just because people are having boomlets in August does not tell you that the rules no longer apply. We've had summer boomlets before.
But Bill, it feels different. I'm telling you, you can go back and watch the tapes. We were doing this 4 years ago when Herman Cain and Michelle Bachmann were polling well, and we probably played along a little bit to, but because you have to write about something. But like, I think I certainly knew deep down that it wasn't going to last, that it was going to be Romney. Sort of always knew it was. I think Rick Perry was the only person initially that I thought might be able to topple Romney. And then when he flamed out, we always knew it was going to be Romney. This is different. Like, you might say, oh, it's the same thing, but I'm telling you, it feels different to me. I never really thought that Herman Cain or Michelle Bachmann was going to win. I mean, if you asked me if it was in the realm of possibility, I would have said it was within the realm of possibility. But like, this is a different phenomenon. I feel like something weird is happening out there, and this isn't my first rodeo,
I mean, the only thing, I mean, look, we'll see what happens in a few months. But if Trump and Carson fade by the winter, and the nominee is Jeb Bush, then it would be the case that the rules still apply, that you can't be a manifestly unqualified person and become a nominee of a major party. That even very conservative Republican primary voters will accept someone who's not ideologically pure if they feel that person is the most electable choice. Like, that scenario could well still happen. And just because there's a boomlet today, I mean, sure. I mean, there's a possibility that Trump or Carson are favoring as the nominee.
Well, keep in mind, we're not talking about the general public. We're talking about likely Republican primary voters in places like Iowa. I mean, that matter the most, right? And you asked me, is it possible that they have decided that the establishment is screwing them and that they've essentially given up hope of working within the system and that the paradigm has shifted and that political experience not only doesn't matter anymore, they see it as a negative? Look, I think that's a bad trend, and I write about it in my book. I mean, I don't think you should be on the Supreme Court if you're not a lawyer, if you're not a judge. I don't think you should be on the Supreme Court. I know you can be. But to me, it's like, if you're going to go to the major leagues, I'd like to see that you played at least for the Frederick Keys or the Durham Bulls or something. Like, I'd like you to have a little bit of experience. I'm not saying you have to, Ben Carson's never been elected dog catcher. He's never been elected to the state house, So, in my opinion, I feel like political experience is important and that we should not elect somebody to be to the major leagues who hasn't at least played a game in the minors. Having said that, I'm not normal. I'm not your average Iowa likely primary Republican voter. So if you're asking me, is it possible, maybe even likely, that they have decided that experience not only means nothing, but it's actually a detriment? Yes, I think that's entirely possible.
But Iowa Republicans have historically not been in sync with the rest of the Republican Party. I mean, the campaign trail goes through Massachusetts and New York and California and Ohio. There's all sorts of bigger, more diverse states where even Republican voters are not this narrow band of social conservatives. I mean, Huckabee and Santorum were also never going to be the nominee. That was also pretty ridiculous, and they still won the Iowa caucuses. But the rest of the schedule did not favor them, and so I just don't get why we think just because you can, let's face it, con a faction of the Republican primary electorate when it is safe to be con because you're not actually voting tomorrow, and people haven't locked their brains in and started taking it more seriously. Why does that prove that, like, all rules out the window? Everyone running for president, go be jerks. Go insult everybody.
Okay,
go half-cocked on Twitter. That's the way to win. It doesn't prove that.
I'll concede on the Republican side. What's the old line? Iowa picks cotton, New Hampshire picks presidents. Okay, but still, that means New Hampshire picks presidents. So forget I said Iowa. Now it comes down to who does New Hampshire pick? I mean, the early states do matter, Bill. They do set the tone. If somebody runs the table, and if somebody wins Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, which I doubt would have, there's 17 candidates in the field, seems unlikely, right? But maybe it's New Hampshire then, not Iowa. But they do matter, and my point is still that we are talking about not persuading the general public. We're talking about persuading Republican primary voters or caucus goers or whatever that experience doesn't matter, that in fact not having experience is what matters. And you're asking me if I think that's going to eventually fade away and they'll come to their senses. Why would I believe, what leads me to believe that this is just, as I've been hoping and saying, maybe they're going to date Trump but end up marrying Rubio or somebody else. I don't have any evidence that that's going to happen. I'd like to hope that happens.
Well, let me shift gears slightly, because I think this does speak to this notion within a faction of the Republican Party base that the current Republican leadership is either corrupt or incompetent or disingenuous. There's a sense that I think Eric Harrison said, Trump is doing well because there's a Republican leadership that's broken their promises, right? And the parties and the voters don't trust them anymore.
The DC cartel. The DC
right.
cartel.
And that's Ted Cruz's lie. Let's defeat the Washington cartel. And it all speaks to they didn't fight to repeal Obamacare hard enough. They didn't fight Obama's immigration actions hard enough, as if they ever had the ability to stop these things. And they didn't, and there wasn't any fighting at all, just because they fought and lost. Not the same as breaking a promise. It means you didn't have the numbers to win. Now, we're in September. Congress is coming back. We have a deadline that is, about three plus weeks away before the government will shut down. If Congress does not pass a bill to fund the government, Mitch McConnell said we're gonna get back to regular order and do the 12 appropriations bills and fund the government that way. That, of course, did not happen. Those bills never got out of the dock. It's now they have to do the whole so-called continuing resolution, do the whole year's budget in one fell swoop to keep the doors open. And I wrote about this in Real Clear Politics a few days ago. This is already going to be a tense negotiation because Obama's budget increased spending on both military and non-military domestic spending. So it's a reversal of the trend. There's been a deficit reduction trend since 2011 when they passed the sequester. That was the rough edges of that was sanded off slightly after the 2013 shutdown failure. The Ryan Murray budget, a compromise, pulled back a little bit on sequester, but the sequester caps kicked back in unless there's something new to replace Murray Ryan. Obama saying let's jack it up some more. The Republicans are actually kind of split on the spending level question because you have you have folks on the right that want to cut spending outright, and you got some military hawks that want to increase military spending and are willing to deal with Democrats in order to get that. The Republican budget resolution from the spring avoided that conflict by saying, well, let's just increase military spending and cut social spending. And this is a budget resolution that's not a law, that can't be filibustered, doesn't need Democratic votes, doesn't need Obama's signature. Let's just pass that and call it a day. Now we're in September. You have to deal with Democrats. You have to get past the Senate filibuster. You have to get Obama's signature. So what do you do? So already how to negotiate that was already complicated. Now, after the summer of the Planned Parenthood videos, you have this demand from the social right. We have to defund Planned Parenthood, and we have to do it now because, as I'm sure you know, even though there's a ban on direct federal funding of abortion, Planned Parenthood gets federal funding for their non-abortion services. The charge that money's fungible doesn't really matter.
Right.
Democrats would say the accounts are separate, so it does matter. And be it as it may, there's now, and Ted Cruz is now leading this fight. He had a conference call with religious leaders last month, saying we had to use every procedural means to defund Planned Parenthood. Once again, he says we have to make it so if Obama shuts down the government of Planned Parenthood, that's his fault. That's my fault.
I'm sorry to laugh. Did I am I laughing out loud? I'm sorry. I apologize. I probably shouldn't.
I agree. It's hilarious. We've been here before.
Oh.
You have 18 House Republicans who said they're not going to vote for any budget that has Planned Parenthood funding in it. So, as I point out in my piece, if they get enough numbers, now McConnell and Boehner are saying no shutdowns. McConnell is saying there's no way defund Planned Parenthood with Obama in office. Can't happen. We got to worry about that later. If Ted Cruz can get enough Republican senators or the House can get enough Republican Congress people to withhold their votes for any budget that includes the Planned Parenthood funding, all you accomplish is forcing Boehner and McConnell to rely on more Democratic votes to keep the government open, which they have pledged to do. And that gives Democrats the leverage to say, okay, I'll do that, but you got to increase domestic spending to get my vote. So my argument to Ted Cruz and others is saying all you're doing with this Planned Parenthood fight is creating the circumstances to make government bigger, which I presume conservatives you do not want to do. It just seems like so you put aside the political question. Put aside where the political fallout would be, who will get blamed, who will look better a year from now. I'm not even going to get into that debate. Just from a policy perspective, it seems to me the end result of the Planned Parenthood fight will be, at minimum, status quo government, at worst, from a conservative perspective, bigger government.
Well, there you go again, Bill, thinking ahead and employing logic and strategy.
I apologize.
By the way, breaking news as we record this. So it'll be old news by the time you see this. But according to the Twitter, judge nullifies Tom Brady's 4-game suspension, according to the AP.
Nullified.
So I do think that kid, Tom Brady, has had a tough life. I'm glad to see things are finally turning around for him up in your neck of the woods, Bill. It must be tough being married to that supermodel and having three rings, I think. Maybe it's 4. Anyway.
Well, I'm not New England born and bred, so I am of the mindset that the Patriots are chronic cheaters. Though I take the argument that perhaps maybe they're all cheaters for all I know. Maybe the entire world of professional sports is just nonstop cheating.
Well, it is. It is funny that you bring that up because David Graham at The Atlantic tweeted, Tom Brady is so obviously guilty, and yet I kind of like this outcome because it sticks it to the terrible NFL. To which I responded, isn't this the same dynamic that makes Donald Trump popular? I think that's essentially the same rationale for Trump's popularity. It's like at least he sticks it to people that we don't like, the RNC or whatever.
Well, as the great Jesse Ventura always said, win if you can, lose if you must, but always cheat.
And I think he said better to be lucky than good as well. So anyway, back to the much more serious topic. I agree with you, Bill. I think that I'd like to see Planned Parenthood defunded. I think the gambit that would shut down the government will only be counterproductive. It will only hurt the cause of conservatism. Therefore, it is a stupid thing to do. Now, there are a lot of other things that conservatives could do and are doing, including in the states. People like governors like Scott Walker, who have sort of defunded it in the states. I'm working on a piece right now that will lay out specifically why I think it's a dumb idea and what conservatives could do instead. But who wins, though, no matter what, is Ted Cruz. If by some unimaginable circumstances Planned Parenthood is defunded, Ted Cruz wins. If Planned Parenthood is not defunded, Ted Cruz wins, and he will say that if Republicans had only had only stuck to their guns and fought a little bit harder, they could have done it, but they betrayed us. So he wins either way. This is smart politics for him. And by the way, it's possible that, Cruz's plan is pretty smart too, right? I mean, he's continued to prosper even as he's been overshadowed by Trump. I think the Overton window expanding also makes Cruz appear moderate. And now we're heading into a season where there's going to be, Congress is back in session. And instead of just Trump talking, you'll have Cruz doing things like trying to defund Planned Parenthood to prove his mettle. So I think Cruz is in pretty good shape right now as well. No, again, the Republic suffers and the conservative movement suffers. And this is the whole premise of my book, Too Dumb to Fail, which is all about perverse incentives, about people who take risks knowing that they cannot lose no matter what they do, that they'll somehow be bailed out, that they have perverse incentives, that there's the tragedy of the commons. Individuals like Ted Cruz prosper while collectively the conservative movement and the Republican Party is hurt, and presumably the pro-life cause, I would even say.
Now, I agree with you. This is all good for Ted Cruz. I mean,
yes.
Although I'm dubious it will actually make him rise in the polls, because nothing he has done so far has actually made him rise in the polls. But he'll certainly get a lot of media attention. He'll certainly be able to buttress his message that it's him against the world. And if you're a conservative, you should ask yourself, am I doing this for good reasons, or am I just helping Ted Cruz? But how does that affect the rest of the field? Literally Rubio, Graham, and Paul will have to vote on these bills.
Yeah. So
they have to make a choice. But what does Jeb Bush say? What does Donald Trump say? What does Ben Carson say? What does Carly Fiorina say? Isn't this tricky now for them to, because they all want to say they want to defund Planned Parenthood, but now they have to be on record whether they're for shutting the government down or not in the process. And if you're Jeb Bush, for those who actually think they might become the nominee, they might want to think 2 steps ahead and saying, do I want to be on record saying that I was agitating for a government shutdown?
Well, and that's why this is so damaging. It's one of the many reasons. There's a lot of reasons I'm going to detail that this is damaging, but one of them is that you force every other Republican to side with the government shutdown, which could hurt them in a general, potentially. But they have to, because nobody can explain what I just explained, because there's not enough time. There's no room for nuance. You can't say, I want to defund Planned Parenthood, and I think abortion is murder. However, I'm not willing to shut down the government because it will actually harm the cause of the... There's not enough time. Nobody gets that. You're either with us or you're against us. And you're either willing to do what it takes to stand up to the Washington cartel and the ruling class and make D.C. listen, or you're not. And if you're not, you're a rhino sellout squish who doesn't care about the unborn. So that's the choice. So then if you're a thoughtful conservative like a Marco Rubio, you have to, if you're politically smart, I think you have to side with Cruz and support this government shutdown, right? It's a smart political move. That's what I would tell him to do if I was advising him. Politically, that's what you have to do, right? And that's why the problem persists.
You can't say I want to defund Planned Parenthood and I don't want the government to shut down.
I don't think you can say that.
If I was president, we would have the government open and we wouldn't defund Planned Parenthood, and that's why you should vote for me.
I don't think you can get away with it. I think that's too much. That's not a bumper sticker, Bill. That's a paragraph. That's a paragraph. I think it has to be. I mean, this forces everyone. It's a problem. This is like the frustrating part, and this is just like the latest in a long line of these sort of things. The average person out there, who's a conservative, doesn't know that. I mean, they don't know that there was already a vote that in the Senate that defunded Planned Parenthood, and that 54 senators, bipartisan, 54 senators, if you include Mitch McConnell, which I do, 54 senators voted to redirect funds, which is actually what they're doing. They're not defunding Planned Parenthood. It's redirecting funds to other women's health organizations, right? 54 senators, but guess what? You need 60 votes to pass it, and then you need 67 to override Obama's veto. That is the reality of where we're at, and that's just in the Senate. And so, obviously, the House could pass it easily, but it's not going to happen in the Senate. There's no way you would override the veto if it did happen. So that's the reality, but like nobody knows that, right? And so if you're an average conservative voter, you sort of believe what you're told. You listen to Rush Limbaugh and Mark Levin, and you basically outsource your politics to them. They tell you, you trust them, and they tell you if Republicans just fought harder, they could do this. And what good is it? We elected Mitch McConnell or John Boehner to be the speaker, to be the majority leader, and yet they can't even defund Planned Parenthood. In light of the fact that we have these videos showing Planned Parenthood workers sipping Chardonnay, picking at salads, talking very cavalierly about selling baby parts or whatever, and yet we can't do it. I don't understand that, and I wouldn't understand it either unless I followed this stuff. And I don't know. It's very depressing. The state. It's why I'm writing the book about it. Go get the book.
Now, we also had this week Obama securing the 34th Democratic Senate vote in favor of the Iran deal, which means whatever, if there is a resolution of disapproval that clears Congress, Obama can veto it and know that his veto will be sustained. So this is another example of Republicans being unable to work their will despite the congressional majority. Is this going to be another situation where the Republican leadership takes some of the blame? Are they going to say, you didn't fight hard enough to end this deal? You should be, putting the screws on Obama and trying to take away other funding sources to prevent this deal from being implemented. You're just rolling over after this. So you took one shot in, you failed, and then you threw in the towel. Is this going to feed that notion that there's a Republican Party leadership that is unwilling to fight the good fight?
So I haven't followed this one as closely, but I think that the person who takes the brunt of it is Senator Corker, because there's a sense that he, maybe inadvertently, maybe on purpose, it depends on who you talk to, but that he made it possible that Obama could do this, that stopping him would require a supermajority and not a simple majority. That is the sense, and whether true or not, I think that Corker is the one who is going to be blamed by Republicans as the sellout or the one who allowed Obama to do this. It is interesting too. I mean, obviously, there's a bipartisan majority. Just as it is weird that we live in a country where there's a bipartisan majority that wants to defund Planned Parenthood, and a bipartisan majority in the Senate that wants to stop this Iran deal, and that the will of the majority in both cases means nothing.
I mean, I think in both cases, bipartisan is kind of stretchy. We don't have we sort of have a lot of Democrats that want to defund Planned Parenthood or want to scotch the Iran deal. You got two Senate Democrats that are opposed to the Iran deal, and how many Democrats want to defund Planned Parenthood?
One of the two Democrats is the presumed next Democrat majority leader.
Well, I mean,
minority leader, but hopefully minority leader if you're Republican.
But it's notable that his announcement of opposition did not bring along anybody else. You have pockets of disapproval of the Iran deal in some of the Jewish areas of the country, New York and Florida.
Are you suggesting, Bill, that Schumer is somehow plays politics and is known for doing things to pander to voters?
Well, I mean, Schumer's as Machiavellian as they come. I mean, that's why he's going to be the Senate Minority Leader no matter what happens here.
I stand by the.
He might actually oppose this thing for all I know in his heart of hearts. I have no idea what his calculation is.
I still think we get to call it bipartisan. By definition, it's bipartisan.
But I want to be clear though. It's not the case that Jewish America is unanimously against the deal. Far from it. And you have plenty of Jewish Democrats who are coming out in favor of the deal. So it's not like it is a deep schism. But to the extent there is any opposition to the deal in the Democratic Party, it does seem to essentially be New York and Florida. Even red state Democrats who are not in Jewish areas like John Tester in Montana or Joe Donnelly in Indiana, those guys have been for the deal.
I'm just pointing out I think it is interesting that the two big topics in the Senate right now are defunding Planned Parenthood and the Iran deal, and in both cases, a bipartisan majority opposes the president, and in both cases, it doesn't matter. They're not going to, our system does not allow them to reverse it.
I believe, we have this thing called the Constitution where power is spread out amongst different branches.
Sometimes that gets to be a problem. Let's be honest, but I'm still a fan.
We don't live in a 100% populist society. We don't govern by referendum. It's a republic, as I think as you are a Republican member of the Republican Party.
If you can keep it, republic. If you can keep it, but eventually, I feel like we'll just be voting on the iPhone. Just cast your vote, simple majority.
But to go back to Corker, it's true that Corker did not function like a Tom Cotton or Lindsey Graham in this process. He was not all fire and brimstone about defeating the Iran deal. He's opposing it. He's been critical of it. But he did not put his name on that letter that Tom Cotton circulated. That was very provocative to the Iranian government, and he did negotiate with the White House this Corker-Cardin bill, which created a review process, a congressional review process upon finalization of the negotiations, Congress has 60 days to review it, and then the opportunity to vote on a resolution of approval or disapproval at the end of that 60-day period, which Obama can veto or not. So some are saying, well, Corker, so on one hand, it's not fair to blame just Corker, because that got nearly unanimous support. Talk about bipartisan. This was a 98-1 vote in the Senate to have this process, and it sailed through the House just as easily. So every Republican is on the hook with this. If they want to fight Corker on this, they had their chance, and they did it. But more fundamentally, what folks don't really understand, because neither side wants to explain it, is Obama currently has the executive authority to waive sanctions on Iran because Congress gave him that power in the original sanctions bill. They had waiver clauses. So Obama is not usurping authority and ignoring Congress. He is using authority Congress gave him. And Congress cannot take away that authority without passing new legislation that survives a veto. That's the fundamental issue here. So all the Corker-Cardin bill does is acknowledge that reality. It's sort of meaningless legislation because they'd have the same authority with or without it. But they're in that predicament because of what Congress did. And the Republican Congress, I mean, there are several sanctions bills that have the same kind of clause, but the most recent one was done while Obama was president, passed by Republicans. They included the clause.
Why did they do that, Bill?
And now they have
why did they do that?
Well, I don't know if it's just because it's been precedent, because it's in the past sanctions bills. There's been a general understanding that you give the executive the authority to execute foreign policy, that you don't have 535 foreign policy chiefs, and they're following that historical precedent. But acknowledge that you're doing that. Don't pretend you didn't do it.
Right. But I think they would also argue that precedent would suggest that what his deal should have been a treaty and not not an order.
But to the extent that it's not that, so it's not a treaty. It doesn't get ratified by the Senate.
But what makes it not that? Just because you say it's not that? Like, is there any?
Well, what makes it not that is that it's not legally binding, beyond what whoever is the executive does with it. I mean, if the next executive wants to abandon it, the executive can abandon it arbitrarily. Now, there are probably a lot of consequences for doing that, because this has not just the support of Iran right now, but also England and Great Britain and Russia and China and France and the UN. So you upset a whole lot of apple carts if you do that, but as you would be allowed to do it. You can say, I no longer accept this executive agreement and I'm not going to follow it. What I think the neocons are concerned about is a understanding that if Obama does his part while in office and waives the sanctions for the next year plus, and Iran is following the agreement alongside that, it is pretty politically difficult to just walk in on day one and rip it up. There would be a whole host of very negative consequences if you did that, even though you are technically allowed to do it. And so they don't want the next president to be stuck with that agreement and not have the political latitude to exit it. But as a legal matter, they could. And that's what Tom Cotton was always saying. This is not a treaty. As if Iran doesn't know that. Everyone knows that it's a legally tenuous deal on that basis. But like any deal, it requires the cooperation of both parties. And if one party decides to walk away, then the deal's off. That's the nature of agreements. The argument from the Obama side is, look, if we had this agreement and Iran walks away from it, then we got all the moral authority in the world to bomb them to hell. But we don't have that moral authority today, so why not do the agreement and see how they respond to it? What's the harm? But neocons don't want to give them that chance. I mean, that's the crux of it, in my opinion.
All right. I guess we're about out of time, folks. You want anything in parting, Bill, or do you want to?
I think we can leave it on that note. I'm sure we'll have plenty of opportunity to talk about Hillary's emails in future episodes, as that's not going away, and we'll just save that for next week.
All right. Well, good to get back.